We're getting to Eruvin Daf, where we continue the discussion of the previous Daf, the previous Mishnah, regarding certain leniencies we had regarding a caravan, which we allowed chassis or Eruvin, which is just poles that are vertical or horizontal, and regarding the limitations of that area. Our shiur corresponds because of the anytime Daf Chaim. Appreciate everyone who's joining us today's Daf. Some ideas we can speak about today's Daf are: how large can an area be? That's covered by mechitzas, made up of only horizontal or only vertical parts. That idea, like we said, these are Eruv, or just if it would be chassis. How large can that area be? Additionally, 4 leniencies that were put into place for soldiers who are traveling. That's going to be the next Mishnah. Also, when a mes mitzvah may or may not be moved, sometimes it has to be buried where he's found. And also, finally, why one may be chayiv malchus for walking beyond the Tchum Shabbos. That's going to come up at the end of this parak. Then the next parak begins Oisin Pasan Leberois, which is called Parak Oisim Pasan, which is a unique leniency that they made for those who are oile regel, people who are traveling. That the thing is that the pits that they wanted to give their animals water for are Rosh Hashanah Medaraisa, because it has those dimensions. The area around is Rosh Hashanah. How are you going to take water from the well and give it to the animals? So they made certain leniencies. You don't have to make a regular like Rosh Hashanah. You can make these diyumdin, which are these double poles, which are seemingly like a pole this way, a pole this way. So like that was a leniency that they allowed to enclose an area to make that a Rosh Hashanah. Some of the key terms and concepts are Shabbos hoyel v'hucha hucha. If Shabbos started and it was permitted that area, so then it's already permitted. Even though on Shabbos something might happen that would be problematic. Demai is the halacha that what's called damai. What is this? When you buy from an Amaretz in rings, you don't know if they took a meisus or not. Generally, there's an obligation to separate meisus from that. Machemes Rishus is that when there's a voluntary war, in contrast to Machemes Mitzvah, which was when they have to fight Amalek, or when Yeshua came to conquer Eretz Yisrael, all the other wars were voluntary wars. Meis Mitzvah what's called Meis Mitzvah is someone that has no one to bury him. You just find a dead person, he acquires his place, he has to be buried where he was found. Ma'amachrein is the concept that after we eat a meal, the later waters are obligatory because of Melech Sedaimus. There's a certain type of salt that can blind the person's eyes, and therefore one has to wash his hands. And in Loikin Allah Shanit and Lasars Mises Besin is the concept that if something could bring to a capital punishment, then you don't get lashed for that. Even if, let's say, you got warned for that, but if, let's say, you could technically get capital punishment, then we don't give you the penalty of lashes. So we get in the Daf Yitzayin and Aleph, that we're continuing from it's going to relate back. We're going to say a very enigmatic statement. We had said in the Bryce in the previous Daf, we said that, we said there's certain leniencies of Shesi or Arif, but they may not enclose an area that's Beisasayim larger than their needs. And we're going to see that that's going to help us understand a very enigmatic statement. He says like this: Shleisha, if there's 3 people, B'chamesh Asur. In other words, it means to say sometimes you get 3 people in the caravan that are traveling somewhere. They're forbidden in the enclosed area of a Shesi or Arab, which are vertical or horizontal poles or ropes. They're forbidden even in the area of 5 sa. Yet b'sheva, in the area of 7 mutar, sometimes they can be permitted even in the area of 7 sa. So they said to him, Amar Rav, did Rav say such a thing? That doesn't make sense. How could 3 be sometimes forbidden in the area of 5 sa, and sometimes permitted in 7 sa? He said to them, Iraisa neviye uksivi. Torah neviye miksuvim. It's like a type taking an oath. I swear by the whole Torah. Rav said this, which Amar Rav says, my kasha, what's the difficulty? He says, maybe this is what Rav was saying. If those 3 people needed an area that had a lot of stuff with them, they needed an area of 6 saw, and then they surround themselves with an area of 7 saw, let's say with just vertical poles and not horizontal, then even in an area of 7 saws can be permitted because you don't have 2 extra saw. As that's what we said in the Bryce in the previous stop. As long as you don't have base aside pono, extra space that you're surrounding yourself that's unnecessary, it's not unnecessary because they needed 6. So then an area of 7 is only an extra saw, make it like nivel. But if let's say they only need an area of 5 saw, they keep with and then they surround themselves with 7, then then even in the area of 5 saw is going to be forbidden because now the mechitzas are not effective because they had an extra area of base of sun that was more than what they needed, and therefore that's what we said in the previous stop. That's going to invalidate those walls. But then the Gemara says, but then this is what we learned in the Brisa from the previous stop that says, as long as you don't have an area of 2 so that's extra, that's open, the Gemara assumes that means to say that it's open from a person. In other words, like the way Rashi explains, let's say 3 people. You surround them with these walls, these very inferior walls for an area of 8 sa. If you're going to give every single person 2 sa, you're still going to have 2 extra sa without anyone dwelling in that area. Oh, so that would be a problem because it's without Adam. But if let's say you surround them with an area of 7 saw, then if you give each person 2 saw, you're only going to have 1 extra saw, and therefore that should be permitted. So what are you saying that when you have 3 people in an area of 7, that you only needed 5, it's going to be usher? Seemingly it goes based on the people. Shigmar says, no, Panam Mikalim goes based on, this is the way Rashi interprets it. It goes based on the vessels. In other words, that if between the walls there's going to be an area of 2 extra saw that was unnecessary, even though there are 3 people. But if they don't need more, let's say, than 2 saw, and Rashi says, and you surround them in an area of 4 saw, then the walls would also not work. It doesn't go based on the people. It's not like we give every single person 2 saw. It goes based on the total amount of stuff that they have and the distance to the walls. If it's extra 2 saw, so then you could have, interestingly, that sometimes with 5 it could be problematic, and with 6, with 7 it can be permitted. How so? Depends how much they need, how much stuff they have, and if there's an extra 2 saw, it's problematic. If it's not, then it can be permitted even up until 7. The Gemara continues, which relates to the following discussion. Itma we learned. So we're talking about that the halacha of the shiur, of the caravan, which according to certain opinions is where we give the leniency of shesi ve'erev and how much do we let. So says the Gemara the following machlekes. Let's say we have shleisha, 3 people. Okay, so they have the status as a caravan. Okay, so we said in the previous stop. Umeisechman, now one of the people in the caravan dies on Shabbos, or let's say the other way around. Let's say there was shnaim, there were 2 people in the caravan. And then the Shabbos, a 3rd person joins them. So machlekes Rav Huna Rav Yitzchak. Chadama one says Shabbos geremes. Shabbos is what causes. In other words, when Shabbos starts, that's when the status is finalized, is sealed. So therefore, if you had 3 people and one of them died on Shabbos, since Shabbos started, you had 3 people. So even according to Yehuda, who we said in the previous stuff from our Mishnah, that it needs to be a caravan to permit the inferior walls of Shasi Be'erev, even though now you're left with 2 people, it doesn't make a difference. Once Shabbos started, you had 3 people, it's going to be valid. Now, the other way is true also. Let's say there was 2 people, and you surrounded yourself with an area more than 2 saw, which, according to that opinion, only lets you up until 2 saw. You did more than 2 saw. So even though on Shabbos a 3rd person comes and joins you, according to Read, it's going to be forbidden. Because when Shabbos started, Shabbos you didn't have a caravan, and therefore, even though now you have 3 people, you don't have that leniency, that caused that's going to be problematic. That was one opinion. The other opinion says, no, the urine garment. No, it's the amount of people that cause it, not Shabbos. So if you have 3 people and one of them dies, okay, now you have less than 3 dwellers, and if it's going to be usher. But let's say if you had surrounded yourself with 2 saw, when you had 2 people, more than 2 saw with 2 people on Erev Shabbos, and then on Shabbos a 3rd person comes, okay, great, now we have 3 dwellers, now we have a caravan, now we're going to be permitted in this area, even though it's more than 2 saw. That was the machitz.
You're going to move out the
No,
mechitzas.
you made the mechitzas however much it was. Now you made it more than, let's say how much, you made it more than what, a less than caravan, you made it 2.5 saw. People that are not a caravan can only be up until 2 saws, we said in the previous stuff. You made it 3 saw. Now, if you have a caravan, it's permitted. If you don't have a caravan, it's forbidden. So what's going to be the kaveh? What's going to establish that parameter? Is it when Shabbos starts, or is it the amount of people that you have? That's going to be dependent on this machlekes regarding if it's Shabbos or if it's the dwellers. No, you're not. You're not doing anything. You're not building. It was built from before Shabbos. But it would be good if you have a caravan, and not good if you don't have it. Now, what's the status of the caravan? If the dweller, if let's say you get a 3rd person on Shabbos, let's say you made 3 saw from before Shabbos. And the 2 people you had every Shabbos is not going to work for you. A 3rd person comes on Shabbos, now you have a caravan. So is that going to be okay? Because now I could use this area, we have a caravan of people. But if you say Shabbos, when Shabbos started, you only had 2 people, that's not going to work. So that's going to be dependent on this machlek. So the Gemara says this time, let's prove Rav Huna who the Amar Shabbos Geremes. Rav Huna, we had 2 Amarim, we weren't sure who said what. Let's prove that Rav Huna is the one who says that Shabbos is what causes it. By Shkia, by Ben Hashmoshes, that's what causes its establishment. How do we know this? Because the Amar Rabbah, he says, by Rav Huna, says, I asked Rav Huna this question. Well, by Rabbi Yehuda, I also asked the same question Rabbi Yehuda regarding, if let's say there was 2 courtyards, and there was an opening between them. And Erev Derech HaPesach, now you made an Erev, this is classic Erev Chatzeres, people that have next door neighbors, you're opening up to another neighbor, so you make an Erev between the 2 of you through an opening. V'nistam HaPesach, now the opening gets closed. Or let's say Derech HaChalon, let's say you make it through a window. V'nistam HaChalon, and the window gets closed. Let's say you made an Erev, you joined together on the intention of this being an opening between the 2 properties. Now on Shabbos, let's say the whole wall collapsed down, and now the whole opening closed off. What's going to be the halacha? Could you still join together? So if Amalei Rav Huna said to me, oh, Shabbos, hutra. Once it's permitted, it's permitted. So therefore, since when Shabbos started, it was a valid opening that you could have in the Eruvin Chatzeres, it's going to remain to be permitted. So Tistayim, you see that according to Rav Huna, it's Shabbos that's geremes, because once Shabbos started, that's going to be okay. But then the Gemara says, let's take it one step further. Let's say Rabbi Yitzchak, this machlekes in Meram is bepluked to Rabbi Yisi, Rabbi Yehuda, communicates machlekes Tanoim that now we learn the Mishnah later on that Tzadi Dalam and Aleph. The Mishnah says an interesting case. The Mishnah says that Chatzir Shenifritza, regarding and just to explain the case of that we had over here, that the window that's being closed and the opening that's closed, we wanted to know, can you use how you gonna even join some other windows or openings that it itself would not be fit to make an Erev, as the Gemara tells later on of Ein Vav Medal. So that itself wouldn't be able to join with that neighbor, but a regular opening, which is a valid Pesach, you could join. But that, again, that opening closed, that was where the Rabbi says, yeah, you could continue using some other openings, which it itself would not be valid to make an Erev, simply because when Shabbos started was okay. The Gemara wants to make it dependent on the machlekes Tanaim on the Mishnah Tzadi Dalet, which says Chatzah Shenifrit. So let's say a courtyard was breached on Shabbos, Mishtei Ruchei Seah from the two sides. So we'll explain over there that Tzadi Dalet on the base, why does it have to be breached on two sides? But the same thing is V'chein Bayish Shenifrit Mishtei Ruchei Seah. Let's say a house was breached on two sides. V'chein Mavoi. So too, let's say an alleyway. Shenit L'karei Sabalachayav. Let's say the crossbeam or the side post was taken on Shabbos. Essentially, the cases that the Mishnah there is talking about, they're all the same. The chutzner is not going to function anymore. The bay is not functioning anymore. The mavei, what permits you to carry over there is not functioning anymore because they lost the wall on Shabbos. So on that says the Mishnah a machlekes. The first opinion says mutar leisa Shabbos. It's permitted for that Shabbos because we say once Shabbos started, it had walls and it had a side post, it had a crossbeam. So then it remains permitted for that Shabbos. But b'shul la'salav, it's forbidden from that point on because the next Shabbos it didn't start up permitted. That's the Rabbi Yehuda. He says no. In Mutar Leisa Shabbos, it's permitted for that Shabbos. Mutar Laslav, it's be permitted forever. In Masur Laslav, it's forbidden forever. Masur Leisa Shabbos, it's forbidden for that Shabbos. Which the Gemara on Daf Tzadi Heim and Alpha explains that what Rabbi Yisi means to say is that it's forbidden, and he means to say just like it's forbidden on the next Shabbos, so it's forbidden for this Shabbos. So one thing we see is that according to him, we don't say Hoylo Hutra, which is like Rabbi Yitzchak. So therefore, says the Gemara, Lame Rav Huna Dama Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Huna, who says Hoylo Hutra is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yitzchak Dama Rabbi Yisi. Rabbi Yitzchak is like Rabbi Yisi. So similarly, there's a machlekes Tanaim, which the Gemara says no. Amalacha Rav Huna. Each opinion can tell you why it's different, but essentially, the idea of both of them are saying is that this machlekes Tanaim is only in the case where the mechitzas change, not the people. Rav Huna, Amalacha Rav Huna would tell you, I'm not Dami from Rabbi Yisi. I could even be going Rav Huna, who said that you remain to be permitted. Says I could even say Rabbi Yisi, who says it's going to be forbidden, even though when Shabbos started it was permitted. Why? Ad Kana come Rabbi Yisi. What do we find Rabbi Yisi over there in that case in Mishnah of Tzadi Dal that's going to be forbidden? The last one of mechitzas because you lost the walls. That's really deficient because the crossbeam was fell down or the side post or the walls were breached on two sides. But hach esnul mechitzas. Here, the walls are here. The only thing is that you lost people. According to Rabbi Huna, that's not the primary criterion, and therefore, since the walls are still here, therefore even Rabbi Yisi would agree that you would say Halva Church. And so to the other way, Rabbi Yitzchak, he would tell you, who he says that the urine garment, that it's the amount of people, and doesn't go independent when Shabbos starts. He says, I'm not done for Rabbi Yehuda. He said, I could even be like Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's going to be permitted, even though now you lost the mechitzas on Shabbos. Why? Because I'd come Rabbi Yehuda, and what do you find Rabbi Yehuda over there, LDS Nula the urine? Because you have the same amount of dwellers. It's only that the walls were deficient. Yes, so then he's going to say it remains permitted. Here the problem is that you lost the dwellers, and that's the primary criterion according to him. Therefore, again, it's not necessarily the same machlekes Tanoim. Now the Gemara just concludes from the explanation of our previous Mishnah. If you recall, we had 4 different interpretations in the opinions of the Mishnah, and now we're going to explain the 2 of those opinions. The Mishnah had said, V'chacham, who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, they say no. Rabbi Yehuda had said you have to have shasi ve'erev. He says you can't have one with it. It has to be crisscross. It has to be horizontal and vertical lines. Chacham said no. Echad mishnei dvarim can be one of those two. It can be either shasi or erev. He says Gemara hain tanikama. That's the same thing as the Rabbanan who were disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda was the first opinion. They said that no. Oh, Rabbi Yehuda said it's only by a caravan. They said no, it's not only by a caravan. They only said caravan because that's what's more common. But the truth is it would even be by an individual. And that was of the halach of Shasi Ve'ev. So that's the same thing as the Rabbanan Basrai. So the Gemara says, the difference between them is Yochid B'Yishur. It's an individual in a settled area. In other words, just to remind you, there was 4 opinions in the Mishnah. The Tanakama said that it's even by an individual, and Rabbi Yehuda said no, it's specifically by a caravan. Then Rabbi Yehuda had said that no, it needs to be Shasi Ve'erev, and as more than 2 saw at least. And the Rabban said no, El Yochid could have either Shasi Ve'erev. So that sounds like the same opinion as the Tanakama that was disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda. So that's what Rashi explains now. What the Gemara is saying is that the Tanakama had said, we didn't talk about a caravan, only what's more common. but the truth is it can be permitted even by an individual. But it's an individual similar to a shiur, to a caravan. Where's a caravan? On the road, not in the settled area. Now, since you could make a bona fide mechitza in the settled area, then you're not going to have that leniency. It's only for shiur on the road. So that's what the Tanakh is saying. No, it's not only for a caravan, even by an individual. But the Rabbanim, the later Rabbanim, what we call the Chamaimim, who we're quoting from the Mishnah right now, they're going on the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. What did he say? He said, if it's just Chessi or Erev, it's Ein Mechitza, it's not a valid wall. Now, that means to say it's not a valid wall, not on the settled area, not on the road. So when the Rabbanim are saying no, it could be one of those two, meaning either Chessi or Erev, they're saying it's a Mechitza for an individual or for the many, whether on the road or whether in a Yishuv, and therefore that's going to be the difference between those two opinions. The Rabbanan, in the settled area, not on the road, could you go ahead and make that? The Rabbanan Masra is saying that you could. The Tanakh is not saying that you could. We continue with the halacha in the next Mishnah, which continues similar to the halacha of caravan that we were talking about. There's four things that are exempted for a camp of war, of soldiers fighting in the war. Four things that they're exempt from. One of them is mevin eitzim mikamakim. They can bring wood from wherever they want, or they don't have to be concerned that they're stealing from someone else's wood. Second thing is a betur merchitzi dan. They're exempt from washing their hands. Number three is a medimai. They don't have to separate demai, which generally when you buy from an or it's produce, you're not sure if it took of maesters, you have to separate maesters from, in these soldiers they don't have to, they can buy from the ignoramus, they don't have to separate maesters. And the fourth halacha is umul arab, they're exempt from making a rubi chatzer. So let's say they made camps on Shabbos, and there's a partition between the different camps, but there's an opening, they don't have to make an eruv between the different camps on Shabbos, they don't have to make an eruv chatzer. Those are four exemptions of the soldiers out on Shabbos. So continue on this theme, if there's a camp of soldiers who are going out to fight a voluntary war, which generally a war was always voluntary from the times of Yeshua and onward, because when Yeshua fought to conquer, so that was Mechemes Mitzvah, everyone had to go fight. Later wars were just voluntary wars for other purposes. So such a war, mutarin begezel eitzim yavation, that soldiers are allowed to steal dried wood, and for sure when they're moist wood, but even dried wood, which is more valuable and more resource, you're allowed to go ahead and take that. And Yehudim and Taimim, it says, they also could reside wherever they want. The soldiers could set up camp wherever they want them. And also, wherever the soldier gets killed, that's where he gets buried. So now the Gemara explains the Brisa. We said, we said when they're fighting the war, they're allowed to steal dried wood. So the Gemara says, this halacha of stealing dried wood, takanta de Yeshua. This was actually a takana that Yeshua had made for all the Jewish people. Why are you saying it specifically with soldiers fighting a war? Because Damamar, like the master said, Asar Tanoim Hisni Yeshua. Yeshua made 10 stipulations, as the Gemara says above a comment, and one of them is, two of them are, shiur marnin b'chershin, that they could let their animals graze in the forest, which is every person could take his animals to graze in his friend's forest, and that the owner of the forest shouldn't be particular because anyways he's not harvesting that area, so you're allowed to have your animals go into other people's forests. Umalaktin eitzim is and you're also allowed to gather wood from a person's field. So it's not specifically by war. So why are you saying that this is an exemption for the soldiers? So the Gemara says three differences between a soldier and that of every other person. Hasm over there by the Yeshua's takana was behizme behigi, was by thorn bushes. Those type of wood, those are inferior wood. Hacham sharitzim, here we're talking about regular wood. That's only an exemption for soldiers. Additionally, inami hasam b'mechabarim, there it's talking about when it's attached to the ground. Hacham b'chlushin, here we're talking about even if the owner went already cut it for purposes of firewood. And that would generally be theft for a regular person. For soldiers, they're allowed to take it, it doesn't make a difference. And inami, a third difference is hasam balach, and they were talking about that the wood is moist, so moist wood is hard to utilize. But hacham yavation, here by the soldiers, saying even when it's dry, even that's going to be permitted. Now the Brisa then continued, he said, he says that soldiers can set up camp wherever they want. And the third thing was, wherever they get killed, that's where they get buried. Obviously, Meis Mitzvah, a soldier that was just found dead, he's a mitzvah, a dead person that's, meaning he has no one to bury him. And one of the 10 stipulations that Yeshua had made was that a Meis Mitzvah acquires his place. So what's the chiddush in a soldier? So no, we have to tell you, no, even if the soldier has people to bury him, he has inheritors, he has family members, so he's not a Meis Mitzvah. The time that we learn the Brisa, Mitzvah, who's considered a mitzvah person to bury, is kol she'en le'koven. There's no one to bury him. But if let's say he would call out, or they call out for him, and others would answer, ain't a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. And that's for saying, even so, a soldier could be buried wherever he dies. Now the Gemara, however, asks on the premise that we're saying, is that really true? That a person has no one to bury him, he acquires wherever he's buried, you have to bury him, or wherever he's found, you bury him there. But Vatanya and the Brisa seems to contradict this. Because the Brisa says, you find a dead person lying on a road. So the halach is mefanei liyamin asaratia. You can move him into the side of the road, to the right side, or the small saratia to the left side. Now let's say sada bur v'sada nir. Let's say on one side of the road there's a fallow field, meaning a field that was just empty. But v'sada nir on the other side is a plowed field. So what you do is mefanei l'sada bur, you move him to the side that has a empty field because you don't want to ruin the plowed field. Let's say sada nir v'sada zer. Let's say one side is plowed, the other side is already sown, already planted. So mefanei l'sada nir, then you move him to the plowed side, not to the planted, because that would be ruining the planted area. Let's say let's say both sides have a planted plowed field, or Shtein Drus, both of them have a planted field, or Shtein Boris, both of them are empty fields. Okay, then you can move him to whichever side you want to. Now, but the Gemara's question is, if you entertain to say that he's kind of a kaimai, how can you move him from the road? You got to bury him on the road. How are you allowed to move him to whichever side? You're saying whichever side you have to go ahead and figure out. So Mabibi says, no, over here in the Brisa it says that you don't bury him on the road. It's because we're talking about the Meis Mutla al Meitras. We're talking about that he takes the whole width of the road from one side to the other side. Since you're allowed to move him off the road because there's kahanim, people who have to keep taharis. They're not going to be able to pass this road. It's a blockade because he's blocking the whole road. So since you're permitted to move him, so then you're allowed to move him whichever side you want to. That's the exemption. But generally, the halacha is that he's kan mekayme, and that's why we asked the question regarding the soldier. What's the chiddush? We said even if the soldier's not a mes mitzvah, still he has the halachic exemption. You're allowed to bury him wherever you find him. Now, one of the halachas we said was we said that the soldiers, when they're out and fighting in the war, they don't have to wash their hands when they're eating a meal. Now, that Amabai is an important qualification. He says, we only said this the waters that you wash your hands before you eat the meal. But the waters you wash after you finish the meal is obligatory. And Amar Chia Barashi says, why did they say that the waters after the meal is obligatory? That says because there's a salt from Sedaim that blinds the eyes. Now the Rabban said in Brachas that everything you eat, you should always have salt with it. Now since by salt, generally people dip their fingers into the salt and they eat it like that, so they instituted Ma'amachrein because they could go ahead and put in your eyes and blind you. Now Taisus does point out that now the custom is not to wash Ma'amachreinim because it's not so common to have this Sedaim salt, or because we don't generally dip our finger into the salt after we finish eating. But again, that is much debated in halacha regarding yes, obligatory, not obligatory, but that just I'm pointing out that case. Now, Amabai says, we find like 1 grain of it in 30 saw. In other words, in a core of salt, which is a lot of salt, you find very little of the sedem salt, literally like a small little granule, and still we're concerned for that. Now, that the Gemara just says, let's say a person was not eating a meal, wasn't eating with salt. He's just measuring salt for the donkeys. What's halacha? Does he have to wash his hands or not? Amalei said, that I don't have a question, which Rashi says, for sure you have to wash your hands, because you're putting your finger all over the salt and you're measuring with it. For sure, then we'd be concerned that your person would put in his eyes and blinded, therefore for sure you'd have to wash his hands. So it's not really a meal thing, it's really a salt thing. And if you're involved with salt, we're concerned you're going to put your hands in your eyes and blind yourself, so therefore you have to wash your hands. That's why Ma'amachrein would be obligatory for soldiers too, because they have that same sakanta, the same, which is more chamed than isura, to be concerned for. Now, the next exemption we said was umetimai. They're also exempt from tithing the produce that they bought from an Amaretz when they're fighting a war. Where do we know? This is not like when the Mishnah said this demai. It says, Machil nesanim demai. You could feed poor people demai, and vesachsanoi. What's achsanoi? Echsanya is the soldiers that come from a Jewish king to fight on their enemies. And the Rashi says that they're Jewish soldiers. They're also demai. You could feed them something which is maybe tithe, maybe it's not tithe. Now, the reason why we have that leniency is because really most Amaratsim really do take tithes. It's only rabbinic stringency. By these people, we were lenient by poor people and by soldiers that they don't have to go and take it. Now, Amr Afuni just points out something. He says, Tanma B'lun Brisa, that's actually machlekes this halacha. They say, no, you don't feed the poor people and the soldiers demai. They say, no, you do feed them, which obviously then our halacha is going like Basil. Now, Tish just points out, why is Ravina teaching us this brisa? Generally, throughout Shas, we ask, well, you're coming to teach us something about Beishamai? Beishamai is insignificant. No, and that Tish says a very interesting point. He says, no, if you're going to find a brisa that says you cannot feed them, don't be concerned for that. That brisa is going to be like Beishamai. And that's why we're saying that is a machlekes, but you're right, the halach is like Basil, that you could feed them, and that's what our Mishnah is saying, that's why we're lenient regarding Achsanyai, regarding the soldiers, that they don't have to separate, they could buy demai straight up and eat it. The last leniency was a Mula'arav, that we don't have to go, we're lenient with the Eruvin Chatzer, so not the Gemara qualifies, I'm going to be Rabbi Yami. They said, what are we leaning regarding Eruvin? There's many things that are including the term of Eruvin. We're leaning regarding Eruvin Chatzeris, which join together different houses in the same courtyard. Regarding Eruvin Tchumen, which is how far your halachic residence is on Shabbos, how far you can walk, which is 2,000 amas. For that, they're obligated; they can't walk past that area. The term Chia, as Rabbi taught a brayso, loikin al Eruvin Tchumen. That you get lashes if you walk past the Tchum according to biblical law, because the pasuk says al yetzi ishmem kaim, a person shouldn't leave his place. And from here is where we learn on Tchumen, as the Gemara says later on the Alf. So it's a biblical halacha, unlike Eruvin Chatzeris, which is a rabbinic injunction. So that we're stringent even on the soldiers. On that, Master Rabbi Shloimy he says what he asked on the terminology. We said not only did we say it's biblical Eruvin Tchumen, we said you get lashes. Do you get lashes with something that says in the word of al? The word is al yetzi ishmem kaim. Don't go out. You really, when it says al, does that really give you lashes? But the Gemara asks on that question. Why not? What makes you think not? Now, that's the case. That's the puzzling you get. It says al tifnu lo'ibis v'li'yadaynim. Don't turn towards these types of necromancy of witchcraft. You think that law, you're not going to get lashes too because it says al? What al? Why is al different than loy? So the Gemara says no, that wasn't our question. Rabbi Yomi in Hachikasha, this was his question. Lav shanit lasos mizubezin, and you have a negative prohibition that, however, could come to a warning that could lead you to capital punishment. Because as Rashi explains, right now the Gemara assumes when it says al yetzi ishmem kaimei, it also is al yotzi, which from there we actually learn out the isser of haitzah. Don't take out something from one rishus to another rishus. That's an av malacha of haitzah that you get capital punishment for. And any negative prohibition that you, however, in that same prohibition could lead to capital punishment because it's the same pasuk. If you're not going to do this, you could be liable for mizbez. And ain't like in the love, you can't get lashes, even if you're not being warned for death. You only be warned for lashes. Still, even though now you're not going to get killed, but since technically from that same pasuk you could be killed, you don't get lashes because you could get misa from that and not malchus. So how can you say you get malchus for Eruvin Tchumen for going past the tchum if from that same pasuk you could get misa bezin, so then you don't get lashes? So Rav Ashi says no. Miksiv al yoitzi doesn't say in the pasuk al yoitzi shmekam. Would say don't carry out. Al yetzik it says you don't go out. And therefore, from this pasuk, you don't learn anything regarding haitzah, and therefore the pasuk is only regarding tchumen, which is only a negative prohibition. Therefore, you get lashes, and you would not get misbez, and therefore you're going to get lashes. And again, and that's why we stringe on the soldiers in contrast to the Eruvin Chatzeris, Eruvin Tchumen. They would have this stringent. Halach Mavai, we shall return to the first parak in Seftis Eruvin, parak Mavai, which spoke about primarily about the dimensions of the Mavai regarding as it relates to the Chayr, the crossbeam, and the Lech, and the side post. And then we begin the second parak Eisim Pasim, which continues on the perimeters of what permits an area into Rishus Yachid, especially a certain leniency that we spoke about in this next halacha. Says the Mishnah, Eisim Pasim Liberois. We can make boards for the wells, which is in Rishus Harab, it's a public domain. Now, the wells themselves are, however, Rishus Yachid because they're 10 tefachim deep by 4 tefachim, and you can't fill up from it. So what you could do is you can make these boards to prepare the perimeter, that these boards are going to be around that area to make this whole area into a Rishus Yachid. So then you could go ahead and take the water out and bring it over here, and then your animals could drink from over here. Because if not, this is the middle of Rishus Harabim. What are you going to do? How are you going to ever get the water? So what you can do is Arba Diyumnin. You make 4 double posts, which these posts, they all are one post, but they look like 2 because you make it like a gutter. And when you stick it into the ground, so if you make it, let's say, by the southwestern corner, so if you do it by the southwest, southwest, but whichever one, so you have one wall going to the west and one wall going to the south. And the second one, let's say, if you have it by the northwest, so you have one side going to the west, one side going to the north, and when you put on the 4 corners, it really comes out that on every side, you're having 2 amas of wall. You have an amma here, an amma here, you have an amma here, an amma here. You have on every side, you have really 2 walls of an amma, and then you have the gap between them. So that's Nirin Kishmaina, the Mishnah says. So it really looks like 8 walls. It's really 4 poles, but it looks like 8. Because, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's the review. That's a bit of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Meir, he however disagrees. He says, Shmoina, you actually make 8 poles. That's Nirin Kishmaina, it looks like 12. You have a bar diyum, you have the 4 double poles. And Varbab Shutin, he says you also have extra 4 regular poles, which you put in the middle, and you put on every side, and it's a board that's an amma thick. Now the Gemara is going to explain what type of pit is Remei requiring these Shutin, these regular ones to add on, because Remei agrees that you could leave a gap of 10 amas in the middle, so why would he say that you have to go ahead and make these boards in the middle? The Gemara is going to say it's a special type of a case, which are going to be like 12. And because what's the primary qualifications is that goyven asar tvachim, the height of these diyumdin have to be 10 tvachim high, v'roich ben shisha, and the width on each side has to be 6 tvachim wide, v'oivim kolshu, and their thickness could be even a small amount. Now, ubeineim, how much is the gap between the diyumdin? Is kamalesh de revakas, is the amount of 2 teams of shalish bakar. Each a team of the oxen are 3 cattle together, which if you take 3 oxen, and that's 1 team, and then you take another of 3, that's a total amount of 10 amas, as Merz can explain. If it's less than that, for sure that's okay, but the max that you could have is between a team of 2 teams of 3 oxen each. That's the Rebbe Meir. Yudami says, no, it could be larger. He holds it could be 13 and a third amas, so it's going to be shal arba. It's going to be each group of oxen, there's 2 groups, both hold there's 2 groups of oxen. Now, how many are in each group? Rebbe Meir says each group has 3. Rebbe Yehuda says each group has 4 oxen. So therefore that's going to make a larger area of how much the gap could be, and that's going to be 13 and a third amas. Now, kishuros, these oxen are tied together with a stringency, which that diminishes the amount of the gap. And they're not untied, so the Gemara is going to ask that's the same thing as tied. And achas nechnesses or achas yotzes. However, we look at the 2 groups of teams of oxen, one's going in, one's going out, which is a leniency, because that means it doesn't have to be exactly 10, rather a little bit loose, because you need a little bit more room if they're not walking side by side, but rather walking, one's going in, one's going out, you have to make a little bit more room, so it's a little bit more than 10 amas. Now, the Mishnah just concludes and says that mutula hakrid, you're allowed to go ahead and make the boards closer a little bit to the pit, and make it a narrower area that's enclosed. As long as you have from the edge of the pit until the boards an area that the cow could have reisha beruba b'fnim b'sheisa, that it could have its head and the majority of its body inside and drink from it, that it could be inside, because if it's less than that, then we're concerned that maybe if the cow doesn't all the way fit in, because you made very narrow walls around that well, that you might come to the cow can't fit in. So you're going to bring the pitcher outside the walls, and you be carrying from a shazir to a shazram. So you could make it smaller as small as you want to, but as long as the cow could still fit inside, unless we're concerned you're going to be taking the water outside. Additionally, you could also distance the walls as much as you want. You can make the circumference, you can make the perimeters as big as you want, but as long as they add on boards. Because the further away you're going from the pit, that means to say that the gap between the boards are going to get bigger and bigger, obviously. So you have to make more boards until you don't have between every regular board, or between from a regular board to the diyumdin, the double boards, you can't have, according to a mayor, more than 10 amas. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't have more than 13 and a third. So you can make it as big as you want to, just keep on adding boards, and as long as you don't have the gaps bigger than 10 and 13 and a third. But Rabbi Yehuda, he disagrees, says no, I'd base the sign. He says no, you can't make it as big as you want. It can't be bigger than an area of 100 by 50, which is an area of 2 sa. That's the max. To which Amalei they said to no. They didn't say this halacha of 2 sa elegina with a karfif, only for a garden. Or karfif is a very large area out of the city that, let's say it's like a park, or you store wood over there, but it's not enclosed for residential purposes. That's where we said that's a max of considering that you could carry over there up until Beisa. I don't know your deer, but if let's say it was a pen for animals which you make in fields, where today they're here, today they're somewhere else, and that's to fertilize the fields by the dung of the animals. Oy sahar, which is where they have for the animals of the forest, enclosed area. Oy muktzah, which is the enclosed area behind the person's house. Oy chatzar, which is the courtyard in front of a person's house, which all those enclosures are for residential purposes. Afila beis chameshes kor, and even if it's 5 kor, afila beis asar kor, and even if it's 10 kor, mutter be permitted, it's not true, and therefore mutter lahachri kol, you're allowed to distance as much as you want to. As long as you add on the boards, and here also the pasi berois is also the water is considered fit for a person to drink, and therefore that enclosure is considered for residential purposes, and therefore you're allowed to make it. You're not limited to an area of base. So they disagree with that.
So unlimited, it could be like a size of the entire country.
Yeah,
it's unlimited.
Yeah, why not?
You put it on the United States.
Right, so that's what they do. They have these types of areas around the whole Manhattan. They want to say about around water. Well, yeah, the possible. Well, that's discussed exactly, but it's for the well. It's for the well itself. So the question is how much would be considered that. But as long as you have those boards, where you could close a whole city. I mean, you could make, if you're making boards, just having those gaps. That's a leniency for the Eiler Gov or whatever it is. So some things we spoke about today's daf in Eruvin Daf Zayin. Rav said an enigmatic statement. He said that if you have 3 people in the area of 5 saw, they're going to be forbidden. But in 7 saw, they're going to be permitted. How's that possible? Yes, because here in 5 it's forbidden because they surrounded themselves with 7 and they only needed 2. Here, in 7 that's permitted because they needed 6. So you don't have the halacha because, like we said, and that it's here is only +1, and here it's +2, so that's why it's going to be problematic. And when it says in the brace upon it means from Kalim, it's about how many stuff you have, it's not about how many people that you have. Then we said it, interesting machlekes, let's say when Shabbos started you had 3 people, then on Shabbos one of them died of the caravan. Or you had 2, and actually on Shabbos another guy that was lost, he ended up coming into your group. What's the halacha? So the machlekes, if Shabbos or are the dwellers causing that halacha? If you say it's Shabbos, so when Shabbos started, that's going to be the kaveh. We don't care if you gained or you lost. Whereas if it's the dwellers, depends how many people there are. We don't care when Shabbos started. Now, this is not obviously the same machlekes tanoim regarding when the walls fall on Shabbos, because you could say that no, when there's no walls, you could say that that's going to be worse. Or you could say that no, here there's dwellers. In other words, it's not dependent one on the others. The one who holds it's about dwellers could say, even the one who says when the walls fall, it is okay, and you do say kimin shur because you had the dwellers. And according to the one that says that it's not going to work, could say that even the one who said that it's not going to, that the one who says it is going to work, you say like Rav Huna says kimin shur, he could say the one that says, oh no, you lost the permissibility, but that's because the walls fell. But if you would have the walls, then it would not be dependent on the diurim, so it's not necessarily machlekes tanoim. We had said from the Mishnah that the Chacham said one of the 2 things could permit a wall, either shasi or eruv. So the Gemara says, what's different than the Tanakama, who also permits by an individual by shasi ve'eruv, is that even by a settled area, the last Chachamim, they were saying not only on the road, but even in a settled area they hold, and which is what we do, you could have just shasi as a wall, you don't have to have crisscross, you have to have horizontal and vertical. Next Mishnah said that there's 4 exemptions when the soldiers are fighting in war. One is they can bring wood from wherever they want, or they're not concerned for a theft. Second is that they're exempt from washing their hands, which the Gemara ultimately said it's only Ma'am Rishon, but Ma'am Achreinim is obligatory because we're concerned for the Sedaim assault. Also, they're exempt from Demai, which is just like we brought a Mishnah by paupers and Achsenoi, which that is the soldiers that they're exempt from, that's like Pesil. And also Umla'arav, which we said that they're exempt from, specifically Eruvin Chatzeres. Rabbi Shloimy, we said that they could get lashes, and there we're more stringent. And it's not considered lavanit lasod mizbezin because it says al yetze, not al yoitzi. You don't learn at haitzovim, you only learn at tchumen, and therefore you would get lashes, and therefore we are stringent on that regarding soldiers. We said regarding melchemes or rishus that, what do you mean? That permitted by stealing the dried wood. What do you mean? Takanas Yeshua was you allowed to take other people's wood? No, the difference is by Yeshua it's only by thorn bushes, and it's only if it's attached, and it's only if it's moist. Here by the soldiers we're lenient even if it's other wood, even if it's detached, and even if it's moist. Another leniency is we have that they could set up camp wherever they want to, and wherever they get killed, that's where they get buried. So what do you mean? Isn't every mes mitzvah? Yeah, but even if he's not a mes mitzvah, even if he has people to bury him, still the law is going to be you bury him wherever he is. Also, the heter of that moving a mes mitzvah, didn't we say he's in b'mukayim? So why do we say that Bryce said you're allowed to move him? That specifically if he's takes up the whole road, then you're allowed to move him. But generally, you're right, a mes mitzvah is kana es mukayim. Hanulach mavoy. Okay, I got a little excited. I'm sorry about that. A whole parak in Eruvin. Wow. Kazach nechesla, you're rocking. Keep it up. Buckle up. We're just getting warmed up. We start parak beis oisin pasa now. So we started then the next mission of oisin pasa lebirois, which we said that what are these boards you're making for the wells, which are leniencies? You can make these 4 double posts, which seem like 8, because again, each post is really 2. So that's how many you make. That's according to Yehuda. Remeir, which will explain to Gemara why would he hold. Everyone agrees the gap is whatever they hold. Why would you have to make more? Remeir says no. You actually make 8 poles, which look like 12, which is that you make 4 double posts and 4 single posts. So besides the double posts, like we said, you're going to be making also another extra regular pole in the middle of it. And we said the parameters has to be 10 tefachim high, has to be 6 tefachim wide, and the thickness could be even a minute amount. Now, how much is between them? That we have a machlekes. One opinion holds that Remeir holds that we're talking about each one holds talking about 2 groups of oxen, but Remeir holds each one has only 3, so that's going to be 10 amas. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, each group is actually having 4. That's going to make for a total of 13, and the third that you have the gap. And those groups of oxen are tied together and not untied. And also one's going in and one's going out. So again, it's got to be a little bit more than how much that measurement is. We said you're allowed to make it as close to the well as you want to, but as long as the cow could get most of its head and most of its body inside, or else we're continuing to come to carry it out. You're also allowed to make it as far as you want, also as long as you increase the board. So as long as you don't have the gaps, more than 10 or 13 and a third. If you disagree, says no, you limit up until base asayim. On that, they said to him, no, that's only for a garden or for a karfef, which is not really a residential enclosure, like parks. That you're limited how much you can carry up to 2 sa, but something that's for residential purposes, you're allowed to make it as big as you want to. And we're just lenient by passing berais because of the water situation. But yeah, that leniency could be even more than Mesa Simon, not limit up to those 2 sa. Thank you, Charlie, for hosting us.